Welcome to Exquisite Stories. Please subscribe, I will really appreciate it. The billionaire meets and finds love with the homeless girl on the way. Sophie's fingers brushed over the worn strings of her guitar, coaxing out a soft, melancholic tune. She sat on the cold concrete of the subway platform, her back against the graffitied wall, as the roar of passing trains filled the air. The world around her buzzed with the rush of commuters, but she existed in a space apart, an invisible soul lost in the crowd, just trying to make it through another day. Her fingers moved, almost automatically now, as the familiar rhythm took over. She had played this song countless times, yet it always felt like the first time. Music had been her escape long before she'd found herself here, on the unforgiving streets of New York, with nothing but her guitar and the remnants of a broken heart. She glanced up briefly, hoping to catch the eye of a few passers-by, but most of them were too busy, too wrapped up in their own lives to notice the girl sitting on the floor with a guitar. A few tossed a few crumpled bills into her case, but Sophie barely looked at them. It wasn't the money she was after. She didn't need the pity. What she needed, what she longed for, was the feeling of belonging again. A sense that she wasn't just another face in the city, a nameless figure lost among the crowd. Her eyes wandered across the platform, studying the people around her. The businessman in a sharp suit, rushing to catch the train. The teenager with headphones, lost in a world of his own. The old woman clutching her purse tightly, eyes scanning her surroundings with wary caution. No one noticed her, not really. She was a ghost, drifting through the cracks of their daily routines. The clattering noise of a train's arrival startled her, but she didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just kept playing. A familiar voice inside her whispered that it didn't matter. That one day, she'd be remembered, not for the way she was now, but for the music she could still create, for the life she would one day build. But today wasn't that day. Sophie was used to the silence that came after the music stopped. The hollow feeling that followed the last note, the sharp pang of loneliness that crept in once the crowd had dispersed. When the train doors slammed shut and the commuters scattered in different directions, she was left once again in the same spot, still alone, still invisible. Then, just as she was preparing to pack up her guitar, a voice broke through her thoughts. "Excuse me." That was beautiful. She looked up quickly, her heart skipping a beat. A man stood a few feet away, wearing a well-tailored suit and an air of quiet authority. He wasn't the type of person who typically took notice of someone like her, not the kind of man who stopped for a homeless girl strumming a guitar in a subway station. But there he was, looking at her as if he had all the time in the world. Sophie's throat went dry. She wasn't used to people stopping, not anymore. Not unless it was to throw some spare change her way or offer a few words of hollow sympathy. But this felt different, something in his eyes, in the way he spoke. It was genuine. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sophie couldn't find the words. She hadn't been looked at this way in a long time, like she mattered, like she was worth noticing. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice cracking slightly. I didn't expect anyone to stop." The man smiled faintly. "I'm glad I did." He stepped closer, his gaze softening as he looked at her guitar. "You've got talent. Have you ever thought about performing somewhere other than here?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Like where?" "I run a charity event once a month. It's not much, but we feature local artists. Maybe you'd be interested in performing?" Sophie stared at him, trying to read his expression. Was he offering this out of genuine kindness? Or was it pity disguised as charity? "I don't know," she trailed off. It wasn't that she didn't want to take the opportunity. She did. But trust was hard for Sophie, especially when it came from strangers with too much money and too many expectations. The man seemed to sense her hesitation. "I understand if you're skeptical," he said. "But I promise you, I'm not here to make you feel like a charity case. I just think you deserve a chance to be heard." Sophie studied him for a long moment. His face was kind, his voice steady and sincere. She wondered what he was really after. She had seen men like him before, the ones who thought they could fix people like her, the ones who used their wealth and influence as a way to control. But something in his eyes made her pause. Maybe it was the vulnerability she saw there, something familiar, something she hadn't expected from someone like him. "What's your name?" she asked. "Carter," he said, offering his hand. She hesitated but shook it, the touch warm and firm. "Sophie." "Well, Sophie," he said, "I hope you'll think about it. I think you could really go places." Sophie glanced down at her guitar. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "You don't have to be," he replied, his voice gentle. "But if you ever change your mind, I'm here." With that, he turned to leave, but stopped midway. "I'll be around," he added over his shoulder before disappearing into the crowd. Sophie sat there for a moment, her heart racing. She couldn't explain why, but something about him had struck a chord in her, a note she hadn't expected to hear. She shook her head, trying to shake off the feeling. She didn't need any more distractions. Her focus had to remain on surviving, on getting by each day. There was no time for dreamers. But Carter's words lingered. "You deserve a chance to be heard." Sophie wasn't sure if she was ready to believe that just yet. But for the first time in a long while, she let herself wonder what it might be like to actually have that chance. The sound of heels clicking sharply against the polished floors echoed through the vast marble lobby of Vance Enterprises. Carter Mason strode through the space with effortless confidence, his sharp suit a perfect match for his commanding presence. He had long since learned how to disappear in a crowd, his every movement deliberate, his gaze focused. His life, filled with board meetings, high-stakes deals, and endless obligations, didn't leave much room for anything personal. Yet, there was something different in the air today, something he couldn't quite shake off. As he entered his office, the expansive city view through the floor-to-ceiling windows greeted him. But today, the usual thrill he got from the skyline fell flat. His thoughts kept drifting back to the subway. To Sophie. He shook his head, dismissing the idea. It was absurd. She was just a homeless girl, one of the thousands in a city of millions. And yet, every time he closed his eyes, he saw her sitting there, playing her guitar with the kind of focus that spoke to something deeper. Something more real than the polished world he inhabited. With a heavy sigh, Carter dropped his briefcase on the desk, his mind wandering. How had he gone from being the most sought-after entrepreneur in the city to obsessing over a woman he barely knew? She wasn't his type. She wasn't a socialite or a high-powered executive. She didn't belong in his world. But there was something in the way she'd looked at him, something vulnerable and raw. It wasn't like the others. Sophie wasn't impressed by his wealth, his status. She wasn't looking for a savior. It had been a long time since Carter had felt that kind of genuine connection. "Mr. Mason," his assistant's voice broke through his thoughts. "The investors are waiting for you in the conference room." "Right," he said, snapping back into his business persona. He smoothed his tie, standing to his full height, and gathered his focus. He wasn't going to let this distraction ruin his day. He had a company to run, deals to close, and a reputation to protect. But as he walked into the conference room, his mind still lingered on Sophie. The sharp contrast between the world he was about to step into and the raw honesty he'd seen in her eyes was jarring. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure what he wanted. And that uncertainty gnawed at him. The conference room was sleek and modern, as expected, with dark wood panels lining the walls and an impressive glass table in the center. It was the kind of room where decisions were made, fortunes built, and lives changed. Carter had long grown accustomed to the sight. He entered with the kind of effortless confidence that came from years of being at the top of his game. The investors were already seated, their expensive suits and sharp looks reflecting the same drive that defined Carter's world. They were all here to discuss the latest expansion plan for Vance Enterprises, a multi-million-dollar deal that promised to solidify his company's dominance in the market. "Good morning, gentlemen," Carter greeted, taking his seat at the head of the table. His voice was firm, the kind that commanded attention. He didn't have to raise his voice, not in this room. His presence alone was enough to make people listen. As the meeting unfolded, Carter's mind remained focused, for the most part. The numbers, the projections, the risks, all the usual things. But there was a part of him that couldn't help but drift back to the subway, to Sophie. The image of her playing guitar, her fingers dancing over the strings with such ease, stayed with him, creeping into his thoughts like an unwelcome guest. He tried to shake it off, but it was impossible. Sophie was different. There was something about her that had struck a chord deep within him, something that neither his wealth nor his success had ever been able to provide. He was used to women who saw him as a prize to be won, a stepping stone to their own ambitions. But Sophie wasn't like that. She hadn't even flinched when he'd offered to help her. His hand absently toyed with the pen in front of him as the investors discussed their next steps. His attention was only half there, his mind constantly wandering back to that moment in the subway. Her guarded expression. Her quiet confidence. It was strange how a brief encounter with someone who had so little could leave him feeling so unsettled. The sound of the word dividends brought him back to the room, and he straightened in his seat. His assistant, a sharp woman named Clara, stood at the door, holding up a hand to signal a brief interruption. Carter's gaze flickered to her before he nodded. "I'll be right back," he said, excusing himself from the meeting. As he stepped out of the conference room, Carter took a deep breath, as if stepping away from the pressure of his high-stakes world for a brief moment. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, seeing a message from Clara. "Sophie's here. She just showed up outside the building." The words hit him like a jolt of electricity. Sophie. Why was she here? He had barely thought about her in the hours since their brief encounter, but now that her name appeared in his inbox, it felt like a pull, something he couldn't ignore. Without thinking, Carter slipped out of the hallway and toward the back exit of the building. His heart beat faster than usual as he pushed open the door and stepped out into the cold air. A few pedestrians passed by, oblivious to his presence, but his eyes scanned the street, searching for a glimpse of her. And there she was, standing on the corner, her guitar case at her feet. Sophie looked smaller in the daylight, her expression unreadable as she glanced at the towering building before her. She didn't belong here, not in this world of sleek offices, designer suits, and high-powered executives. But still, there she was. "Hey," he called out, his voice more uncertain than he'd intended. Sophie turned, surprise flashing across her face when she saw him. She quickly wiped away whatever emotion flickered in her eyes, but Carter had already caught it. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his words coming out with a bit more force than he'd intended. He didn't want to sound like he was questioning her, but he wasn't sure what had brought her to his world. This pristine world he didn't think she'd want any part of. I was just passing by," Sophie said, her voice guarded. She shifted uncomfortably, her hand nervously gripping the strap of her guitar case. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just thought. I don't know, I'd check out your company." Carter frowned. "You came to my office?" She nodded, looking at him with a combination of skepticism and curiosity. "You told me to come by if I changed my mind about performing. So I thought, maybe I'd see if you really meant what you said." His stomach tightened. She had come all the way here, on a whim, unsure of what to expect, but she had come because he had offered her something, a chance. It wasn't just about the performance. It was about trust. And here she was, testing it. Carter's mind raced. Was he ready for this? To let her into his world? To step out of the confines of his wealth and the walls he'd built around himself? He wasn't sure. But something about Sophie, the raw honesty in her eyes, pulled him toward her in a way he couldn't explain. "I meant it," Carter said, his voice softer now, more sincere. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "I want to help. If you're serious about performing, I can make that happen. But I won't pressure you. I just want to see you succeed." Sophie's eyes softened just slightly. "I don't need anyone to save me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not looking for a handout." "I know," Carter replied, his voice unwavering. "I'm not offering one. Just a chance." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world continued on around them, people rushing by, taxis honking, the hum of the city, but for just a few seconds, the noise faded. It was just them. Finally, Sophie nodded. "I'll think about it," she said, her expression unreadable again. "But I'm not looking for anything more than that." "I can respect that," Carter said. "Take your time." Sophie turned to leave, her guitar case slung over her shoulder. Carter watched her go, a part of him unsure of what would come next. But as she walked away, he felt a strange sense of certainty settling in. This was just the beginning. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't mind the uncertainty. Sophie walked down the busy streets of Manhattan, her guitar case swinging by her side, the weight of it a reminder of the uncertainty she carried with her every day. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts were elsewhere, far away, lost in the world of her music, her escape from the harsh reality of living on the streets. It had been a few days since she'd seen Carter, and the memory of their brief interaction in the subway station kept resurfacing in her mind. Why had he offered to help? She'd lived in this city long enough to know that people didn't just do things like that for no reason. Maybe he was some rich guy who thought he could fix her, help her get back on her feet, and pat himself on the back for being a good Samaritan. That's what most of them were like. But something about Carter felt different. He didn't look at her with pity. There was no judgment in his gaze. Just a quiet curiosity, as if he genuinely wanted to know her, to understand her story. Sophie shook her head, trying to push the thought away. She couldn't afford to get distracted. She had to keep moving, keep playing her music, keep surviving. The world didn't care about the why or the how. It only cared about whether you could survive another day. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't see him standing in front of her. "Hey!" Her heart skipped a beat. She looked up quickly, and there he was, Carter. Standing right in front of her on the busy sidewalk, looking as confident and polished as ever. But this time, there was something different about him. He wasn't wearing a suit. Instead, he wore a simple black jacket over a white shirt, his sleeves rolled up casually. His presence still commanded attention, but there was a warmth about him now that she hadn't noticed before. "Carter," she said, a little surprised but not hiding the slight tension in her voice. She took a step back, still wary but not completely guarded. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, a slight smirk that softened his features. "I was hoping I might run into you," he said, his voice smooth and easy. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Hoping to save me again?" "No," Carter said, his smile fading slightly as he stepped closer. "No saving. Just offering help. If you want it." Sophie looked at him, unsure of what to make of this. Was he sincere, or was this just another attempt at charity? She didn't know, and frankly, she didn't care to know. "I'm not looking for charity," Sophie said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I'm just trying to make it on my own." "I get that," Carter said, nodding. "And I respect it. But that doesn't mean you can't accept a little help now and then." "I'm not asking for anything in return, Sophie. I just wanted to offer you a chance to do something more with your music. You don't have to take it. But I think you could go far." Sophie was silent for a moment, processing his words. His offer wasn't just about giving her money or a place to stay. It was about something deeper, a chance to make her music her life, to stop surviving and start living. But she wasn't sure she was ready to take that leap. She had worked too hard to get to where she was, and letting someone in felt like a risk she wasn't sure she was willing to take. "I'll think about it," she said, her gaze still fixed on him. "But I don't want anything more than a chance. No handouts." Carter nodded, his expression serious. "I wouldn't dream of offering you one." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to slow around them, the sounds of the city muffled as they stood there, two strangers in a sea of people, connected by something neither of them could explain. Finally, Carter broke the silence. "I'm heading to a cafe nearby. I've got some free time. I'd like to hear more of your music, if you're willing." Sophie hesitated, but then, without quite understanding why, she found herself nodding. "All right. I'll come with you." They walked in silence, the tension between them slowly easing as they made their way to the cafe. It wasn't until they reached the door that Sophie realized she hadn't asked why he'd taken the time to look for her. Why had he gone out of his way to find her again? But before she could voice the question, Carter opened the door and gestured for her to go in first. "After you," he said with a warm smile. Sophie hesitated for just a second before walking inside. This wasn't the kind of place she usually frequented: warm lighting, wooden tables, and the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee. But there was something calming about it. Something safe. She let herself relax just a little as they made their way to a corner booth. As they sat down, Carter pulled out his phone. "I'll be right back," he said, standing up. "I just need to grab us some coffee." Sophie nodded, and as she watched him walk away, she couldn't help but wonder what had led him to this moment. What did he see in her? Was it really just about the music? She shook her head, trying to push the questions out of her mind. For now, she would take it one step at a time. One moment. One song at a time. As she sat there, waiting for him to return, she realized that, despite herself, she was beginning to look forward to what came next. The cafe was quieter now, the afternoon rush having passed, and the gentle hum of conversation seemed to fade into the background. Sophie sat in the corner booth, her guitar case resting by her side. She hadn't intended to stay so long, but something about the quiet comfort of the place kept her there. The soft clinking of coffee cups and the warmth of the sunlight filtering through the window made her feel like she could almost relax, if only for a moment. She glanced at her phone again. The time had passed, but Carter still hadn't returned. Sophie tried not to think about it too much. She'd told herself she wasn't interested in playing the waiting game, wasn't the type to hang on someone's every word. But there was something different about Carter. She didn't want to admit it to herself, but it was there, his genuine interest, the way he'd listened to her without trying to fix her, the way his offer had been free of expectations. She had to be careful, though. People like him didn't just offer help without wanting something in return. It was a subtle thing, but Sophie had seen it too many times. The kindness often came with strings attached. That was why she'd kept her distance. Why she hadn't let herself get too comfortable. The sound of the door chiming broke her from her thoughts. She looked up, expecting to see Carter, but instead, the cafe door swung open, and a young woman stepped inside. The woman, dressed in a smart casual outfit, glanced around the room before her eyes landed on Sophie. "Are you Sophie?" she asked with a friendly smile. Sophie blinked, a little taken aback by the sudden appearance. "Yeah, that's me," she said, standing up slightly. "Can I help you?" The woman approached with an air of quiet confidence, offering her hand. "I'm Clara. I work with Carter. He asked me to come meet you. He's running a bit late, but he said he'd be here soon." Sophie hesitated for a second before shaking Clara's hand. Something about the way she spoke seemed too polished, too professional. This was Carter's world, and it made Sophie feel out of place, like she was slipping into something that didn't quite fit. "Okay, thanks for coming by," Sophie said, still unsure of what to make of the situation. Clara smiled and took a seat across from her. "I know this might seem a bit unconventional, but Carter really does want to help you. He's not just offering you a performance. He's offering you something bigger, a way to get your music out there. He believes in you, Sophie." Sophie's eyes narrowed. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," Clara replied calmly. "But Carter doesn't always wait for people to ask. He's not one to sit back when he sees someone with real potential. He wants to help you make that leap. But it's up to you whether you want to take it." Sophie looked down at the table, unsure of how to respond. Clara's words felt too rehearsed, like she was reading from some script she'd memorized. It made Sophie feel like she was being sold a dream. But something in Clara's gaze told her that maybe it wasn't all just an act. Maybe there was sincerity behind it. "I'm not sure what kind of help you're offering," Sophie said slowly, her voice guarded. "I can't just take something for nothing. I don't work that way." "I understand," Clara said with a nod. "Carter doesn't want to give you a handout. He wants to give you an opportunity. It's up to you to decide if it's worth taking." Sophie stayed silent, thinking it over. There was a pull inside her, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could take a step forward in her music career. But could she trust this opportunity? Could she trust Carter? Just as the silence stretched on, the cafe door opened again, and Carter stepped inside. Sophie's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately looked up, meeting his gaze. There he was again, looking as calm and collected as ever. But for some reason, this time, it felt different. He wasn't just offering a chance anymore. There was something more in his eyes, a kind of quiet understanding, as if he had seen her struggle and wanted to help her rise above it. He walked toward the table with a warm, genuine smile. "Sorry I'm late," he said, sliding into the seat next to Clara. "I didn't want you to think I was running out on you." Sophie met his gaze for a moment, still unsure. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, Carter. I don't know if I can trust that you're not just looking to fix me." Carter's smile softened. "I'm not trying to fix you. I'm just offering you a chance to do what you love, on your terms. You don't have to trust me. You just have to trust yourself. Trust that you deserve this opportunity." For the first time, Sophie felt the weight of the offer, the potential that it held. It wasn't just about the performance or the money or the connections, it was about her music, and about taking control of her future. "I'm not going to force you to make a decision now," Carter said. "But when you're ready, the opportunity will still be here." Sophie looked at him, then at Clara, and finally back at her guitar case. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about surviving. She was thinking about living. About taking that leap and seeing where it could take her. "I'll think about it," Sophie said, her voice steady but filled with a new sense of possibility. "I'll let you know." The days following the cafe meeting were a blur for Sophie. She couldn't quite shake the decision that had begun to hang over her head. Carter's offer lingered in her mind, an opportunity to perform, to have her music heard beyond the subway stations and dim-lit corners of New York. He wasn't asking for anything in return, at least not yet, and that thought both relieved and unnerved her. She hadn't been in control of her life for a long time, not since she had ended up on the streets. The idea of taking a chance, of stepping out of her self-imposed boundaries, terrified her. But deep down, she knew this was her shot. The chance to do something more than just survive. Sophie sat on the edge of the small bed in her guest room, the soft hum of the city creeping through the window. She glanced around the room, luxurious, comfortable, and completely foreign to her. Carter had insisted she stay here for a few nights, allowing her the space to decide. The room felt like a temporary refuge, an oasis from the cold, hard streets she was so used to. But the question still hung in the air: was she ready for this? She couldn't deny the lure of Carter's world. He had given her a glimpse of what could be possible. The way his eyes had softened when he spoke to her, the way he had genuinely wanted to help, he wasn't just another man offering to fix her. She wasn't sure if she believed in the sincerity of the offer just yet, but it was enough to make her reconsider her stance on accepting help. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. She got up quickly, heart racing slightly. Was it Carter? Clara? Come in, she called out, trying to steady her breath. The door creaked open, and to her surprise, it was Carter standing in the doorway. His usual confident demeanor was softened by a warmth that made the air in the room feel different. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice low and gentle. Sophie smiled faintly, feeling a small sense of comfort. "No, it's fine. I've just been thinking." "Good thoughts, I hope?" Carter asked, stepping inside. "I don't know yet," she replied honestly. "It's hard to decide." "I know it's a lot to take in," he said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "But I wouldn't offer if I didn't believe you had the talent. And I wouldn't ask you to trust me if I didn't think you were worth it." Sophie didn't say anything for a moment, her fingers lightly brushing the strings of her guitar, which was resting in the corner of the room. It was a familiar comfort, a reminder of who she was before everything changed. "Have you decided?" Carter asked, his gaze steady as he watched her. Sophie looked up, meeting his eyes. She was no longer as unsure as she had been the first time they'd met. The fear was still there, but it wasn't as strong. There was something about Carter that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could do this. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "I'll take the chance. But only because I know it's what I want." Carter's expression softened, a smile breaking across his face. "You won't regret it, Sophie." For the first time, Sophie felt a spark of hope light up inside her, and it was a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. This wasn't just about performing, it was about taking control of her life, about doing something for herself. The next few weeks passed in a blur of rehearsals, meetings, and late nights spent lost in thought. Sophie had taken the leap. She'd accepted Carter's offer, albeit with a hesitant heart. But as the days went by, she began to see the shape of her future form in front of her, slowly taking on a more vivid and tangible form. Carter had kept his promise, he wasn't just offering her empty words. He connected her with a local music producer, a man named Elijah who had a reputation for spotting raw talent. Sophie's first meeting with him had been full of nerves, but Elijah was different from what she expected. He didn't look at her like a charity case or a project to fix. He looked at her with the kind of professional respect she hadn't experienced in years. "Your sound is unique," Elijah had said after hearing Sophie's demo. "It's raw, but it's got depth. I can work with this." Sophie's heart had soared at the compliment. Maybe she wasn't just a girl playing guitar in the subway. Maybe she had something worth sharing after all. As the days passed, she found herself spending more time with Carter. They'd meet at cafes, in the studio, and sometimes even just in the park, talking about life, music, and what it meant to really take a chance. Sophie couldn't help but notice how different he was from anyone she'd known before. He wasn't just offering her help, he was genuinely invested in her success. And with every conversation, every laugh, every shared moment, Sophie realized that her feelings for him were growing stronger. One evening, after a particularly long rehearsal, Sophie found herself sitting across from Carter at their usual cafe. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city, and the soft hum of conversation filled the space. Sophie had her guitar case beside her, her fingers idly tapping the top as she stared out the window, lost in thought. "You're quiet tonight," Carter remarked, his voice breaking the silence. Sophie looked at him, her gaze but thoughtful. I'm not sure what to think anymore. Everything feels like it's moving so fast. I know it's a lot, Carter said, leaning forward slightly. But you're handling it better than you think. You've made more progress in a month than most artists do in a year. Sophie smiled, a small, uncertain smile. It's just, this isn't the world I'm used to. It's all so polished. So different. Carter studied her for a moment, his eyes gentle. It's not about the world around you. It's about the music, Sophie. That's what matters. Sophie nodded slowly, her fingers continuing to tap against the guitar case. I know. But sometimes, I feel like I'm not good enough for this world. Like I'm just pretending to fit in. You don't have to pretend with me, Carter said softly. You've already earned your place. You're more than enough. His words hung in the air between them, and Sophie felt a warmth spread through her. There was something in his tone, something she hadn't expected from someone as accomplished as Carter. He believed in her, not just as an artist, but as a person. And for the first time, Sophie began to believe in herself, too. She met his gaze, and for a moment, the world outside the cafe seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, sitting there, talking about dreams and fears and everything in between. I'm scared, Sophie admitted, her voice quiet but steady. Scared that this might all fall apart, that I'm not really cut out for this. Scared that I'll let everyone down. You won't, Carter said firmly. You've already come so far. You're doing this for yourself now. Not for anyone else. Sophie took a deep breath, her mind swirling with everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she'd needed someone to believe in her. She'd been fighting for so long, trying to prove that she could do it on her own. But Carter had shown her something different, that she didn't have to do it alone. I guess I just need to trust myself, Sophie said, her voice filled with newfound resolve. And I'll be right here, helping you every step of the way, Carter said, his words carrying a quiet certainty. The tension that had been building in Sophie's chest slowly began to ease. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. And she had the opportunity to build something beautiful, both with her music and with the man who had helped her see her potential. As the evening wore on, they shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of understanding. And in that shared space, Sophie knew something had shifted inside her. She was ready. Ready to take on whatever came next, not just for herself, but with Carter by her side. Sophie had come so far, but the journey wasn't as easy as it had seemed in the beginning. The initial excitement of being taken seriously as a musician, of working with a talented producer and being surrounded by professionals, was starting to fade into something more complicated. With every opportunity that came her way, the fear of failure grew stronger, the weight of expectations heavier. The studio was buzzing with activity as Sophie walked in for yet another session. Elijah was already at the mixing board, headphones on, making adjustments to the track they'd been working on for days. Carter was in the corner, discussing a potential performance with someone from a local venue. Sophie's heart was pounding in her chest. She hadn't wanted to talk about it, hadn't wanted to admit it to herself, but the truth was becoming impossible to ignore, the pressure was building. She was living a dream she wasn't sure she deserved, and it terrified her. Ready to give it another try? Elijah called to her, pulling her from her thoughts. Sophie nodded, her fingers gripping the neck of her guitar. She didn't feel ready. She didn't know if she would ever feel ready. As the music began to play, she tried to lose herself in it. But her mind kept drifting. What if they didn't like her performance? What if they realized she wasn't good enough to make it? Carter had been so supportive, so sure of her talent. But deep down, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it was all going to come crashing down. After a few takes, Elijah stopped the music. Sophie, that was great. But I can see something's off. What's going on? Sophie tensed, biting her lip. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself any longer. "I don't think I can do this," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "I'm not cut out for it. This whole thing, it's just too much." Elijah took off his headphones, his expression softening. "You're a lot stronger than you think. This is normal. It's part of the process." "I can't do this," Sophie repeated, her hands trembling. "I'm not ready. I'm not the person you think I am." She turned to leave, but before she could make it out of the studio, Carter stepped into her path. His calm presence seemed to ground her for a moment, even though her heart was racing. "Sophie," Carter said gently, his voice steady but firm. "I know you're scared. But running away from this isn't going to fix it. You can't let fear control you. I've seen you grow so much already. Don't let it all fall apart now." "I don't belong here, Carter," Sophie whispered, her eyes brimming with frustration and fear. "I don't belong in this world. You've given me all these opportunities, but I'm still the same girl I was before. I'm not cut out for this. I'm going to mess it all up." Carter shook his head slowly. "You're not going to mess it up. You're just afraid of letting people see the real you. But that's the person we all need to see. The one who plays with heart, who's honest in her music. That's why I believe in you." Sophie met his gaze, her emotions a tangled mess. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable like this, especially not with someone who had given her a chance like Carter had. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her feel like she didn't have to hide her fear from him. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You can," Carter replied firmly. "But you have to stop running. You have to believe in yourself the way I believe in you." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel everything, the fear, the doubt, the pressure. But with Carter standing there, offering his unwavering support, it was easier to let go of the self-imposed barriers she'd built. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. "Okay," she said softly. I'll try to believe in myself." Carter's smile was gentle and understanding. "That's all I ask." The moment wasn't over, but something had shifted. Sophie felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it didn't feel as overwhelming with Carter by her side. Sophie spent the next few days lost in a whirlwind of emotions. The weight of her fears hadn't magically disappeared after her conversation with Carter, but it felt lighter somehow. She hadn't expected his words to have the effect they did, but they had opened something inside her, a part of herself she had buried for so long. She had always been good at keeping people at arm's length, afraid that if anyone saw too much, they'd see all the cracks. But Carter had seen through them, offering her kindness without expectations. And for the first time, she didn't want to hide anymore. Sophie walked into the studio on a Monday morning with a quiet sense of determination. Elijah was already there, fiddling with the mixing board, as usual. Carter was nowhere to be seen, and that was fine. She didn't need him there to prove to herself that she was ready. She had made the decision to keep going, to push through her fears. "Ready for today?" Elijah asked as he looked up from his work. Sophie nodded, feeling a surge of confidence that she hadn't felt in a while. "Ready." They spent the next few hours working on her track, fine-tuning every note, every chord. Sophie could feel herself growing with every take, her confidence building as the music began to flow more naturally. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. She was finally starting to embrace her imperfections, letting the rawness of her emotions come through in her music. Around lunchtime, Sophie took a break, stepping outside to get some fresh air. She had learned to enjoy the quiet moments in between the work, when she could just be herself, away from the noise and the expectations. As she walked along the street, she bumped into Carter. He was standing outside a cafe, talking to someone on the phone, but as soon as he saw her, his expression softened. "Hey," he said, walking toward her after ending the call. "How's the session going?" "Good," Sophie replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It's coming together." "I knew you'd get there," Carter said with a grin, his confidence in her never wavering. "You've got it in you, Sophie." The words should have felt like just another compliment, but for some reason, they landed deeper than any others. She wasn't used to being seen for who she truly was, and yet, Carter had managed to see her in a way that felt both empowering and terrifying. "Thanks for everything," she said quietly, her voice a little shaky. "I don't know if I'd be here without you." Carter tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. "You're the one who did the work. I just helped you see it. But you're welcome, of course." For a moment, they stood in silence, the noise of the city swirling around them. Sophie could feel the weight of their unspoken connection, the bond that had grown between them over the past few weeks. She was beginning to realize that it wasn't just the music that had changed her, it was Carter's belief in her. It had given her the strength to believe in herself. "You're different now," Carter said softly, breaking the silence. "You're not the same person who first came into the studio." Sophie met his gaze, the intensity of his words not lost on her. "I don't feel the same. I don't know if I ever will again." "And that's a good thing," Carter replied, his smile gentle but sincere. "You're growing, Sophie. And I'm proud of you for letting yourself heal." For the first time in a long while, Sophie felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't completely free of her fears, but she was learning to live with them, to move through them instead of letting them hold her back. As they stood there on the busy street corner, Sophie realized something she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before: she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And she had Carter to thank for helping her see that. Sophie's music career was no longer a distant dream, it was becoming her reality. It had been months since she'd stepped into Carter's world, and every day had been a lesson in resilience, growth, and, most importantly, self-belief. The music studio had become her second home, and Elijah, the producer, had transformed from a skeptic to one of her biggest supporters. The track they'd worked on for weeks was finally ready. It wasn't just a song, it was her story, her soul, laid bare for the world to hear. Carter had helped her get it to this point, but the work had come from Sophie. Her voice, her lyrics, her sound, every part of it was uniquely hers. And now, the world was going to hear it. It was the night of her first big performance, a showcase at one of New York's most respected venues. The room was packed with industry professionals, music lovers, and a few familiar faces from Carter's circle. Sophie's nerves were almost unbearable as she stood backstage, dressed in a simple yet elegant black dress. Her guitar was in her hands, but it felt heavier than it ever had before. The weight of the moment, the pressure, the expectations, was starting to make her doubt herself. "You ready?" Elijah asked, appearing beside her. His usual cool, collected demeanor had softened tonight, replaced with genuine encouragement. Sophie nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I think so." "You've got this," he said with a smile. "We've been through worse than this, right?" Sophie chuckled, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. "Yeah. We have. Remember, it's not about being perfect. Just sing your heart out." She nodded again, taking a deep breath. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. The weight of the spotlight, the eyes of the crowd, the pounding in her chest, it was all there. But then, just before she stepped on stage, she remembered Carter's words. "You're more than enough." The reminder was all she needed. She walked out onto the stage, her guitar in hand, and faced the audience. The applause was loud, but it didn't rattle her. She had made it this far, not by chance, but by choice. By fighting through the fear, the doubts, and the walls she had spent years building. The first notes of her song filled the room. Sophie's voice, rich, raw, and powerful, carried over the crowd, every word a piece of her. She sang like her life depended on it, her hands moving over the guitar with practiced ease. The room fell into a stunned silence as she bared her soul, leaving behind the girl who had once played for pennies on a subway platform. When the last chord rang out, the room erupted into applause. Sophie stood still, her heart racing as she looked out at the crowd. It felt like a dream. A good dream. One she had worked so hard to make a reality. But it was real. She had done it. Backstage, Carter was waiting for her, his smile wide as he pulled her into a hug. "You were incredible." Sophie pulled away slightly, her eyes still shining with the thrill of the performance. "I can't believe I just did that." "You can believe it," Carter said softly. "You've always been able to do it." For the first time, Sophie felt like she wasn't just pretending. She wasn't trying to be someone she wasn't. She was simply herself, and that was more than enough. Sophie's performance had been a turning point, not just for her career, but for her life. The days that followed were filled with excitement and anticipation. The music world, which had once seemed so intimidating, was now welcoming her with open arms. Calls from venues, managers, and music labels started rolling in, each one an opportunity to move forward. But even with all the success, Sophie found herself standing at a crossroads. The feeling of accomplishment was undeniable, but so was the underlying uncertainty. She had achieved what she once thought impossible, but now, there was a new challenge ahead. How would she navigate this new world? And what would it mean for her and Carter? As the weeks passed, Sophie found herself thinking about him more and more, not just as her mentor or the man who had given her the chance to live her dream, but as someone who had become a vital part of her life. Their connection had grown deeper than either of them had expected. And while Sophie wasn't ready to admit it fully, she knew that the bond they shared was more than just professional. One evening, as they sat in Carter's office after another successful meeting with his business team, the weight of everything that had happened seemed to settle in the room. Carter was leaning back in his chair, casually flipping through a contract when Sophie spoke up, her voice quieter than usual. "Carter," she began, unsure of how to phrase what was on her mind. "I don't know what's next. I've spent so long dreaming of this moment, of making music my life. But now that it's happening, I'm not sure I'm ready for all of it." Carter looked up from the paperwork, his gaze softening when he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. "Sophie," he said, his voice steady and reassuring, "you've been ready for this all along. It's okay to feel uncertain. This is a huge change, but you're not alone in it. I'm here with you, every step of the way." Sophie nodded, a small sigh escaping her lips. "I know. I'm not used to letting someone in. I've been on my own for so long, building walls around myself. I'm not sure how to navigate everything that's changing." Carter stood up from his desk and walked over to her, his steps slow but purposeful. When he reached her side, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to navigate it alone anymore," he said softly. "You've got me." Sophie met his gaze, her heart racing as she realized how much those words meant to her. For so long, she had convinced herself that she couldn't rely on anyone. But Carter had shown her that it was okay to lean on someone, that trusting in someone else didn't make her weak, it made her stronger. She smiled, a warmth spreading through her. "I guess I don't have to do it alone," she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "And maybe I don't have to be afraid of what's next. Not when I know you'll be there." Carter's smile widened, and for the first time in a long while, Sophie felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't alone in this world anymore, and the future, once so uncertain, now seemed full of possibility. She wasn't just building a career, she was building a life, and she wasn't afraid to let someone be a part of it. As the days turned into weeks, Sophie continued to work on her music, her confidence growing with every performance and every new opportunity that came her way. And through it all, Carter remained by her side, not just as her mentor, but as something more, someone who cared deeply about her success and her happiness. One evening, after a particularly successful gig, Carter looked up from the paperwork, his gaze softening when he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. "Sophie," he said, his voice steady and reassuring, "you've been ready for this all along. It's okay to feel uncertain. This is a huge change, but you're not alone in it. I'm here with you, every step of the way." Sophie nodded, a small sigh escaping her lips. "I know. I'm not used to letting someone in. I've been on my own for so long, building walls around myself. I'm not sure how to navigate everything that's changing." Carter stood up from his desk and walked over to her, his steps slow but purposeful. When he reached her side, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to navigate it alone anymore," he said softly. "You've got me." Sophie met his gaze, her heart racing as she realized how much those words meant to her. For so long, she had convinced herself that she couldn't rely on anyone. But Carter had shown her that it was okay to lean on someone, that trusting in someone else didn't make her weak, it made her stronger. She smiled, a warmth spreading through her. "I guess I don't have to do it alone," she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "And maybe I don't have to be afraid of what's next. Not when I know you'll be there." Carter's smile widened, and for the first time in a long while, Sophie felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't alone in this world anymore, and the future, once so uncertain, now seemed full of possibility. She wasn't just building a career, she was building a life, and she wasn't afraid to let someone be a part of it. As the days turned into weeks, Sophie continued to work on her music, her confidence growing with every performance and every new opportunity that came her way. And through it all, Carter remained by her side, not just as her mentor, but as something more, someone who cared deeply about her success and her happiness. One evening, after a particularly successful gig, Carter took Sophie to a quiet rooftop bar overlooking the city. The glow of the skyline stretched out before them, a perfect reflection of the new life Sophie had started to build. They sat side by side, enjoying the peaceful night, each lost in their thoughts. "I'm proud of you," Carter said softly, turning to look at her. "You've come so far, Sophie. And I know this is just the beginning." Sophie looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice sincere. "You helped me believe in myself when I couldn't." Carter smiled, his gaze soft but filled with something deeper. "You always had it in you. I just helped you find it." Sophie's heart fluttered at his words. For the first time, she realized that everything she had achieved, everything she had worked for, wasn't just for her career. It was for her, for the woman she had become, and for the person who had been by her side through it all. "I think I'm finally ready to embrace whatever comes next," Sophie said, her voice steady. "With you by my side." Carter's expression softened, his smile turning into something more intimate. "Then let's see where this journey takes us. Together." The city lights twinkled below, a symbol of all the possibilities ahead. Sophie had faced her fears, taken the leap, and found her place in the world. And now, with Carter by her side, she was ready to embrace whatever the future held. The world that Sophie had stepped into was far from what she had expected. There were moments of triumph and moments of doubt, but with every step forward, she found herself more grounded in her purpose. She had gone from a girl with dreams that seemed impossible to someone who was living those dreams, one note at a time. But as the months passed, Sophie started to realize that her success didn't just come from the music. It came from the people who had supported her along the way, Carter, Elijah, even the small team of people who believed in her when no one else would. They had all played a part in helping her become the artist she was today, but more than that, they had helped her believe in herself. As Sophie sat in the studio one evening, headphones on, her guitar resting on her lap, she reflected on how far she'd come. She had recorded multiple tracks, some of which had gained significant attention. She was no longer just a subway performer, she was an artist in her own right. Yet, despite all the success, there was a part of her that felt incomplete, like she was still waiting for something to click. Carter had been there every step of the way, a constant presence in her life. His support had never wavered, but neither had the bond that had slowly formed between them. What started as a professional connection had blossomed into something deeper, something neither of them had anticipated. They spent hours together, whether in the studio, at the cafe, or just walking through the city, talking about everything and nothing. And somewhere along the way, Sophie realized that her feelings for Carter had changed. What had once been admiration had turned into something more, something real. She was in love with him. But that love was complicated. Sophie wasn't sure if Carter felt the same way, or if he saw her as just the talented musician he had helped shape into someone successful. She didn't want to jeopardize their friendship, their bond, but the pull she felt toward him was undeniable. One night, after a long day of recording, Carter invited her to dinner at his favorite restaurant. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did, but this time, there was something different in the air. Sophie could feel it, the unspoken tension that had been building between them. After dinner, they walked through the streets of the city, the glow of the streetlights casting a soft light on the path ahead. They didn't say much at first, each lost in their own thoughts. But when they reached the park near Carter's apartment, Sophie stopped, turning to face him. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "About?" Carter asked, his eyes meeting hers with a hint of curiosity. "About everything," she replied, her heart racing. "About the music, about my career, about us." Carter's expression softened, and he took a step closer, his hand brushing hers. "You know you don't have to do this alone, Sophie. You never have." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. "I know. But sometimes I feel like I'm losing sight of who I am. Like everything I've worked for is becoming a bit too much. And she hesitated, unsure of how to continue. And I don't want to lose what we have." Carter's gaze softened, and he reached out to gently take her hands in his. "You're not going to lose me, Sophie. I'm here, no matter what. I've always been here. I want to see you succeed, to be the person you've always dreamed of being. And I'm here for that every step of the way." Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of his words, the depth of his support, but there was something else in his eyes, a quiet, unspoken understanding. "I'm not just here for the music, Sophie," Carter said softly. "I'm here for you, the person. The woman who's been so strong, so determined. I've seen you grow in ways I didn't think were possible. But more than that, I care about you. In ways that go beyond the music." Sophie's breath caught in her throat, her heart racing faster. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Before she could respond, Carter stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek. "I'm in love with you, Sophie. And I'm not afraid to admit it." The words hung in the air, filling the space between them. Sophie felt a rush of emotions, relief, joy, fear, and everything in between. She had never expected this, but it felt right. It felt real. "I'm in love with you too," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. And in that moment, everything else faded away. The music, the pressure, the expectations, they all seemed irrelevant. What mattered was that they had finally found each other. Not just as mentor and mentee, but as two people who had fallen in love, against all odds. They stood there for a long moment, the sounds of the city fading into the background, lost in the quiet warmth of the night. Sophie knew that their journey wasn't over, but this chapter with Carter by her side, was one she was ready to begin.